Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 21 Hats podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Feldman. This week, Shawn Busse, Paul Downs, and Jay Goltz go right to the bottom line. Shawn points out how easy it is for businesses to fool themselves into thinking they're more profitable than they really are. Paul talks about how margins can vary from year to year, especially if an owner decides to invest in improving the business, as Paul's doing right now. Jay says he's long sought a 10% profit margin, but so far, he's never managed to get there. Plus, Shawn explains how he solved his accounts receivable problem. And have you looked at the 401k accounts of your employees lately? If not, there's a good chance you're going to find that they're not saving a whole lot. Is that just the employee's problem, or is it also the owner's problem? Even at good times, owning and running a business can be a lonely pursuit. Our hope is that these weekly conversations, brought to you by our principal sponsor, The Great Game of Business, will let owners know they are not alone in facing challenges. Same thing with our daily newsletter, the 21 Hats Morning Report, which Inc. magazine named the best newsletter for business owners and which you can subscribe to for free at 21hats.com, where you can also find transcripts of our podcast episodes and lots of other articles and interviews. Joining me this week on the podcast are regulars Shawn Busse, CEO of Kinesis, which is based in Portland, Oregon, and works with small businesses on marketing, culture, and strategy. Paul Downs, who is CEO of Paul Downs Cabinet Makers, which is based outside of Philadelphia and makes custom conference tables. And Jay Goltz, whose companies in Chicago include a picture frame business, artist frame service, and a home furnishing store, Jason Home. The episode is titled, How Much Profit Should Your Business Make? But before we get started, I've got a little news. I've scheduled the first 21 Hats Live event for Chicago from May 17th to May 19th. This is your chance to meet the regulars on the 21 Hats podcast, along with other owners and CEOs in the 21 Hats community. This will not be a traditional conference where people talk at you. It's going to be an intimate gathering limited to just 20 attendees. We'll have several deep dive peer group sessions where you'll get to raise your own challenges and issues. You'll also get to participate in the taping of a podcast. But most of all, you'll get to engage and connect in a relaxed setting over good food with other owners and CEOs on similar journeys. Let me know if you want more information. You can do that by replying to your morning report or by emailing me at lauren@21hats.com. If you're interested, please let me know soon. As I said, we're only taking 20 attendees. Now, on to today's episode. Welcome, Shawn, Paul, and Jay. Great to have you all here. To start today, I want to dig a little deeper into a question that Jay brought up a few weeks ago, and that's how much profit a small business should expect to make. Jay, you said you've raised this question in multiple business group sessions and never really gotten a satisfactory answer. I'm wondering why you haven't gotten an answer to start. I mean, obviously, profit margins are going to vary across industries, but can't you get a pretty good guideline for where you should be in any given industry?
I'd say no. I think there's a lot of factors. First of all, what's the highest bottom line? I got a friend who owns a business. He's got like a 30% bottom line.
It's not the picture framing business, right?
No, it's not. There's businesses that have a 3% bottom line. I would think that most people would say if you had a 10% bottom line, that's pretty good. There are books out there that you can buy with a bunch of industries in it. Of course, picture framing isn't one of them, that you can look up what is the average profit of a printing company or whatever. And I'd say, 10% probably good. Retail, if you look at the big retailers in America, they're usually at 5-6%.
Shawn, Paul, is this something you guys think about?
I do. I'm in a CEO's group where we have a number of different kinds of businesses, and the guy who's got the best margins is doing about the same gross revenue as I do, but he takes home 4 times as much money. And he's in a $4 million business taking home $1 million a year.
What kind of business?
He runs a company that does business valuations, SBA valuations for banks, and he's an extremely smart guy who really has everything buttoned down. It's just like he's my hero in terms of running a tight business, but he's also running a business where you don't have to buy materials. You just have to pay people.
Well, let me ask you this, because running a tight business certainly is part of it. But from my observation of being in 5-6 groups over the years, people that have really big bottom lines, and tell me how this, I'm going to give you the checklist and tell me if this is true in any of these. They've got some proprietary product, or, they've got a patent that certainly do it, or they've got some business that's been around for years and years and it's got a brand name and everybody wants to buy that, or they've got one big or only a few customers and they don't do any marketing because they sell the buns to McDonald's or whatever. So they've got that advantage, or they have got some market advantage that most people don't have. Does this guy have a market advantage? Why isn't there competition going and doing the same thing he's doing and undercutting his prices?
Well, there is. He's just winning the battle. I think that what you brought up, that different businesses are just different, is really the gist of it. And then the other thing would be, how do you define profit? Because I'm an S corporation and I'm the major shareholder, I tend to think of, we're looking for something like 8 to 10% profit on an accrual basis. But then if you fold in my compensation and looking at something called seller's discretionary earnings, which is like all the stuff I pay money for, but I don't have to through the business.
All those fancy clothes you wear, the fancy clothes.
Yeah, the fancy clothes, the heat for the office, all those fripperies. I was close to 15% on SDE last year. But I think you also bring up another very important point, is that there's a lot of times profitable businesses are profitable because they're not actually doing something that they need to do to secure the business. In other words, your example of someone who does no marketing, but they happen to have a huge customer. It's like, okay, you can, if you're not investing in the things you need to make sure it runs without you, or it could survive without you, or just anything where you might have been spending money, but you just take cash instead. And I think a lot of small business owners struggle with those decisions, particularly when they're trying to get started. They need to support their family and they just decide, well, I can't afford to upgrade my software, or whatever it is that sets them up for the future.
I think the guy you spoke of has got two things going for him. One is, that's a lot of business for a service business. So I think, like, if you're a lawyer or accountant, I think if you can get your sales up to that and you're doing a good job, yeah, you do have a really big bottom line, is one. And two is the fact that he's hooked up with the SBA, he probably doesn't have any marketing expenses. So
No. He does these SBA valuations for banks. He's not directly involved with the SBA at all.
Okay, but still, he's probably got 10 banks he has relationships with.
No, he's got more than that. He's got significant marketing expenses.
Oh, he does. Okay.
He's just very, very good at everything he does. He runs his business using the traction concepts and really does it right out of the book. And he's just a fantastically good businessman.
Paul, can you give us a quick sense of what the traction concepts are?
The book is called Traction. I can't remember the name of the guy who wrote it, but it's a set of moves that anybody who's running a small business could implement. It's about setting goals and holding people accountable, basically, and then doing regular reviews to make sure you're hitting those targets. And if you have no idea how to run a business, that's a pretty good place to start. There's a number of people who've implemented it in my group, and I've implemented a version of it, and it's really effective. It makes you look at, okay, how do I actually run this business? How do I make sure everybody knows where we're going? How do I make sure I have the right people here? It just gives you some ways to go about that. And if you were looking for a set of ideas to guide your actions, it's a pretty good place to start. You may not end up implementing every single thing like I didn't, but certainly gave me a lot to think about.
Shawn, how much thought do you give to what your profit margin should be?
Yeah, so it's a really critical number for, I think, any business. For us, we've tracked it every year pretty closely for, I don't know, well over a decade. I mean, we've been around for 23 years, but I really didn't understand it probably until the last 13 or so. And that was a real eye-opener for me. And I think that the big breakthrough I had was, and we were touching on this a little bit, are the artificial ways that business owners influence profit, either from the income side or the expense side. So, examples are some business owners load up the business with lots of costs to make the business look not profitable because they don't want to pay taxes. But then that creates some artificial views of the business, which can make it difficult when you want to get a loan or if you want to sell the business. I think it also just clouds your vision of what's going on in the business. Other businesses cloud it in other ways in terms of what you all have been talking about, which is like organizational debt. So they don't invest in things over time, like whatever, software, people development, et cetera, et cetera. So they may have really good profits, but the business itself is suffering. And that impact happens over the long term. So for us, I use a really simple idea since we're a service-based business and we don't have a lot of product coming through us. For us, we kind of treat 10% as a break-even mark. If we get below that, that's red lights are going off.
What do you mean 10% is the break-even point?
The way I came about this idea was somebody talked to me about how, there will always be a mistake that you make. There will always be some unexpected event. Somebody files a lawsuit against you, an employee makes a claim, you really screw something up with a client, you end up having to refund their money. There's just so many ways that a business is vulnerable. And what the 10% allows you to do is to have those events happen, the things that are out of your control, maybe an economic downturn, and you can live to fight another day. You're essentially creating enough of a buffer to build resilience into the business. And if you fall below that, at least in my world, in my professional services world, you're just very tenuous and you're often having to act reactively and emotionally, which is never very good for a business.
Okay, so the question is, you use the phrase break even, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, that's really not break even. Wouldn't it be more accurate, entrepreneur to entrepreneur say, that's our loser line? Like, if I run the business and I have a 2% bottom line, I'm a loser. Like, that's stupid. Whereas in your case, if you get to 10%, okay, you did okay. You're doing okay. Could do better, but you're doing okay. It's the okay line. It's not really a break-even line. It's you're doing okay line. Is that not true?
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, technically 0 is break-even.
Right.
But I think that Shawn just laid out pretty much a perfect example of what you need to have in reserve.
Yes.
And that when you take all the money out of the business, you're starving it of any kind of durability or ability to swing with the punches.
Yeah.
That's a completely different thing, though. That's cash flow. I mean, if you pulled all the money out as salary, okay, well, then it's mostly profit. It's not really salary. That's really a whole different subject of how much money you're pulling out of the business. If you had it to pull out, that's profit. You did well. You should have left some in there for cash flow purposes, but that's really a different subject. It's strangling the business.
I disagree. And I think that a lot of people are not in a position to make fine distinctions. They're just trying to keep the doors open. And I've met so many people who are starting up a business who are not paying themselves. And so the first goal is pay yourself and then look at profit beyond that. Because you're working in the business, you cost the business something. Business doesn't even really exist if the owner isn't, well, that's not a good way to put it. The business has no future if the owner isn't paying themselves.
Listen, we actually are on the same page. I certainly agree. You need the 10 in case you need it and all that. All I'm saying is to really look at a business properly, you've got to pull out your salary as the market rate salary. If you're pulling out $1 million a year and you could replace yourself for $200,000, you really had an $800,000 profit. So
correct. Yes.
People should distinguish between those things.
That's super important. And I think a lot of accountants have given owners bad advice over the years to say, pay yourself as little as possible. So you take your money in distribution, so you pay less taxes. And so it just starts to build an artificial version of the business, or the business owner just fundamentally doesn't know what it costs to replace themselves. And so those are the problems you run into when you go to sell the business, when you go to get financing, et cetera. So I really advocate that folks build a true financial picture of the business.
No, what you just said is the problem in the picture framing industry. They go to sell the business and it's selling a job. They're making $47,000 a year. That's not a business. That's a job. So they can't find anyone who's willing to give them any money, because why would they buy a job? So that's the difference between pulling out what the market should be paying you and having anything past that. And you said two things, though, that I'm really curious. The first one, which you said, well, people are bearing it with expenses not to pay taxes. What does that mean? What do you mean they're bearing it with, like what? They're putting their personal stuff on there?
Yeah.
Okay, that's different. Okay, let's call it the way it is then. Okay, then they're putting a bunch of personal expenses on there. Okay, so the business looks bad, but it's really because they are pulling out. Here's an interesting one. We all know you can't deduct country club membership anymore. They changed that years ago. I'm talking to a person who does consulting, And he says, trust me, they bury it in there. They still do it. That was interesting to me. I didn't realize that. They just don't call it country club membership. They bury it in their financials. To your point, Shawn, people are burying expenses in their business, and it looks like the business isn't making money, but they've got cars for everyone in the family and the country club and the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's why there's the concept of seller's discretionary earnings. When someone's picking apart your financials, looking for what the business is really doing, they start flagging those items and looking, okay, well, if I bought this business and I wasn't paying for my brother-in-law, what would it be really doing?
I think the phrase they use, correct me if I'm wrong, they call it recasting the financial statements.
Yeah. One other thing I think that's really important, are we talking the same language, right? Are we talking percent to top line revenue, or are we talking percent to gross profits? And that's a whole nother thing. I'll run into a construction company that does, $80 million a year, but like so much of that is just pass through. And so, are you measuring your financials on the same thing as a service-based business?
Right. Well, you have to be comparing to people in your own industry doing similar things. And the rest of it is just a way to feel bad. When I'm a manufacturer, I'm comparing myself to a guy who's not a manufacturer. He doesn't have to buy materials. And yeah, his business is just different.
Yeah, but you can normalize that. Like if I run into a manufacturer has a really high cost of goods sold, oftentimes I'll just figure out what their number is if you back that out, and then do that as a percentage as a profit of that number, the gross profit number, because then you can start to compare different businesses to each other. And actually, it's pretty telling, I have found.
Well, there's a new phrase that I just came up with called ROM that would be called return on me. So let's look at this picture. You're in a business group. Paul, let's use your guy. It's a perfect example. Phenomenal. Does $4 million, has a 25% bond. He's making $1 million a year.
Yeah.
Great operator. So you could say, God, I feel like such a loser. The guy's got a 25% bottom line. On the other hand, if you're running a $25 million business and you've got a 6% bottom line, you're making $1.5 million. At the end of the day, you're making $1.5 million. Now, it's a smaller percentage of a bigger number, but you're still making $1.5 million. So it's not just about the percentage of the bottom line. It's also what's the actual money you're making.
Yeah, and how complex it is.
The other way to look at it is, if I took the same money and I bought McDonald's franchises, what would I make? Okay,
fair enough. But, that's why I say this isn't simple. You could say, how much aggravation does the guy with the 25, it's not just the bottom line. It's how hard are you working? How much grief do you have? How much financial exposure do you have? How much stress do you have? It's complicated.
Along those lines, when you guys are comparing percentages in a business group setting, are you asking what exactly the other owners are taking out, or do you just accept the percentage they give you?
Well, in my group, each member takes a turn hosting the meeting, and that's a pretty thorough look at their financials with the expectation that, you're going to talk about how much you take out.
I insist on it. I say, this is just a bullshit meeting. If we're going to sit here and put numbers up there and go, oh, look, how much money I made, but you forgot to tell us that you didn't pull any income out last year. You cannot look at someone's bottom line in a small business and not know how much money they're pulling out to assess anything about the business. There's some people that are pulling out $1 million a year, and there's some people that are pulling out $40,000 a year. So you have to know that.
If you see figures for an industry, if somebody gives you guidelines, this is a reasonable profit margin for retailing, for manufacturing, for a marketing agency, whatever. Do you assume that those businesses are being operated on the up and up, and that the owners are taking out a market salary and not running their entire personal life through the business?
As soon as you meet the guy, after 5 seconds, you know the answer.
It is so true. Yeah.
Like you look at Paul with his fancy clothes and his fancy car, you think this guy is living high on the hog.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jay, I'm willing to answer the question of how much money I made here last year.
Yeah.
Are you?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, well then, there you have it. It's a bullshit discussion, folks. I'm very sorry.
No, it's not, because I haven't shared any financials to pretend like I'm making $1 gazillion. So I'm saying, if you're going to go ahead and show us your financials, it's bullshit if you don't tell me how much money you're pulling out. I'm not sharing my financials, so I'm not giving any bullshit. I'm just telling you the truth as I see it.
One of the things that have befallen me over the years, and I think this is pretty common, where in the early stages of the business, the owner tends to use kind of force of personality and will to motivate everything, right? Themselves, the employees in the organization, new sales. And one of the things I notice is that those types of businesses, the kind of 4 to 10 person business, they're usually underpaying their employees compared to the market, because that sort of that charisma and the excitement of the new is motivating everybody. And then what happens is the business gets more mature and starts to operationalize. The problem is the payroll structure is really off. It just doesn't match market, and it starts to become like really difficult to get really good people. And that I see that catch a number of businesses where they think their financials are really healthy, but if they were to do a salary survey, they'd realize that they're 10%, 20% below market. And eventually that artificial advantage catches up to them. It's the same artificial advantage the second and third generation business owner has who owns his building. The same thing.
I think that is very profound. I think that's absolutely accurate. I would only add one more piece. I think they get away with it, not just because of the force of the personality, but they're finding people at the lower, you've just described me. You find someone who's 22 years old that doesn't know anything, and you give them a job. And if you're good at finding diamonds in the rough, while they're still rough, you're not having to pay them like diamonds, and they're not there yet. And then as the business grows and they evolve, you end up paying them. I'm paying everyone very well now. I'm not in that stage anymore. But no, you bring up an excellent point.
Well, that's an example of not actually taking money out that would be required to fund growth. Because if you don't have good people, you really don't have anything. You're vulnerable to those people wising up at any given moment.
Yeah.
I read something really smart years ago. It said most entrepreneurs con themselves to believe they shouldn't be pulling any money out in the beginning of their business, which certainly is a point of you can't pull money out right away. But some people go on like that for 10 years. And there is a point where you should be making enough money. And, we've had this conversation with Laura. She admits she's not pulling out anywhere near what she should be paying herself for what she knows and what. So she still does fine, but it's artificially high because she should be paying herself more. And I'm not saying she needs to. It's just you do need to readjust that.
And probably her husband too.
And absolutely, both of them.
Yeah, so they're like a twofer.
Exactly. So just to be able to monitor your business, know how you're doing, you use it to make judgments. You do have to make I'm not saying you have to pull it out or not pull it out, but you do have to make that adjustment to make sure that you're looking at it properly and what should you be paying? What would someone in your situation be paid? If you don't do that, it skews the whole financials, especially if you're only doing $1 million or $2 million.
I think this is such an important subject. Paul's talked about this, and I've used this model too for a long time, is revenue per head count. And that's another good way to understand if a business is healthy. It really is talking about profitability. It's just a different way. Once you get below a certain number, you're in trouble, and above a certain number, you're magical.
That number varies dramatically, though, whether you're making, tables, framing pictures, or you're an accounting firm. Well, it needs to be done in the context of similar kind of businesses.
Yeah, I mean, my sister owned a restaurant for years, and I ran the numbers on hers, and it just didn't make any sense compared to mine because there's a zillion people coming in and out of a restaurant, and there's tips, and it's just like you got to understand how it relates to your industry, not that it's a universal.
But you can, on the revenue per employee, you can take an accounting firm and compare it to an architecture firm, and you can compare it to a consulting firm. And those numbers are actually pretty close, right? Because they're employing, highly educated professionals in a market where there is an infinite supply. Just as you could probably compare a certain type of manufacturer, like say, a manual machine shop to, Paul's cabinet business.
Yeah, all of the small manufacturing businesses do, because I ask everybody I meet, and they run in a fairly tight range. And then the professional service organization.
What's the range?
If you're doing something like 80,000 per head, you're almost dead. And if you're doing 200,000 a head, you're doing pretty well.
So what's yours?
Mine last year was $183,187 per head.
Okay, mine, and I have a retail mix.
Now you're in a different business with inventory as a significant part of it. So
that's true.
That if you just did the head count, it wouldn't actually tell you anything about a huge portion of where your money's going.
No, for sure. But I'm not far off of you. I'm in the neighborhood. But you're right. The reason why it can't be 80 is simply with minimum wage, what they're at and what people get paid. I mean, the typical lower level employee now is making $35,000 a year. So if they're only bringing in 80, yeah, there's not a whole lot left to pay the rest of the bills.
Jay, do you try to manage to a specific profit margin?
Yeah. And I've struggled with it.
And is that possible?
No, I've struggled with it. And I do the entrepreneur lullaby, which is, okay, this year's tight, but next year, when extra revenue comes in, it's all going to fall to the bottom line because our fixed cost. I've been telling myself that lullaby for 40 years. My business has gotten bigger. The problem at the moment is I've scaled. My business is a much bigger business than it used to be, but my God, trying to keep up with the real estate, the taxes alone, my real estate taxes are a fortune now. The business model has changed. Minimum wage has gone up. I'm not complaining about that. They've now you're paying sick days. My business model has changed significantly in the last 5 to 10 years. And I have to look at my business model and say, okay, I need to charge more for this or that. And it's a constant struggle. But I've never had a 10% bottom line.
Paul, do you try to manage to a specific margin number?
Yeah, 10 is a pretty good target. 8 is not a terrible target for my situation. What I'm talking about is the margin on accrued revenues, and this is beyond my own salary.
Now, the way capitalism works, Paul could say, oh, I would like to have a 20% bottom line. And the reality is that would be difficult because then someone else will come in and be cheaper. That's how capitalism works. I mean, if you try to go too high, you're going to price yourself at a point that it's going to make it easy for someone else to come in. But I think a 10% bottom line for your business, yeah, you're doing really well. And I would say the same thing about myself. Would I be happy with 8? Yeah, sure. I'd be happy with 8.
Yeah, we did 8.24% on accrued revenues of
good.
How much were on the revenues? $4.75 million.
Now that we've had this conversation, though, about professional service firms like your other guy in the group, I would say, yeah, I don't think that is high enough for someone in a professional service firm. It probably does need to be in the 20 range or something.
Yeah, there's another guy who's got some kind of insurance agency, and his margins are in that range too. Now, one of the other things is your margins change year from year depending on whether you invest. So a concept that we've seen play out over and over in our group is that you have a couple of years of profitability, and then you decide, you know what, I want to get to the next level, and you got to splash out some money to do it. And in those years when you're implementing that, you have lower profits. I'm going through that. I'll be going through that this year with all this new marketing I'm doing. And then hopefully it works, and then you ride for a little while, and then you make a decision about whether to repeat that or not.
Here's a question. I don't know if you have the answer to your friend from the group. Here's the question. Is he working really? Is he like doing the proposals and is he sitting in his office doing podcasts like us? Or is he out there in the field, doing the work?
No, he has set up a system, and this is where the traction was very useful, is it helped him build his team and operationalize all of the minute-by-minute work, set up training paths so that he can hire new analysts as he need them. And he spends his time first of all, this is only one of several businesses that he's running. The other two are software plays. One is, best way to describe it would be Zillow for small business, that if you're running something like any of us, we could go to a website, punch in some parameters, and get a business valuation that would be reasonable, which I think is a fantastic idea. And this is the guy who can make it work.
I'll tell you what I've noticed lately. People that are my age that are starting, are they going to retire, not retire? You could take two people making serious money, like $700,000 a year. One's a lawyer and one runs a business. Those are the person running the business might be doing very little and sitting around doing nothing half the day. The lawyer's got grief and clients calling them and working that's a profession. There's a huge difference between being in a profession or owning a business. And that's why most people in professions at some point decide they need to, they don't want to deal with it anymore. Whereas if you own your own business and you've got it running well, it's really not much stress, and you're not, you can come in when you want and leave when you want. Very different.
Yeah. My buddy, he just jumped a plane and went to Barcelona with his friends for a few days last week, and came back and was like, yeah, that was awesome.
If you look at the failure rate of businesses, part of the reason I think you need to make a 10% or more, you need to focus on profitability, is that businesses can be really volatile. I mean, I know, Jay, you've built yours to a pretty high degree of stability, but you've been at it for many, many years.
No, believe me, I've had plenty of rough years, plenty of them.
So what profit allows you to do is to survive to fight another day. And what the 2008 recession showed us was how many businesses were out over their skis. They just didn't have. And the truth is, like, that recession, while it was severe, it didn't last that long, right? Maybe a year, 6 months for some. I mean, for me, it hit me really hard in 2010, early 2010. And it was dramatic. But by the end of the year, I was like moving again. But if you don't have any profit to survive off of, you're screwed.
Well, that's always true. You need to be you need to have resources to survive in small business. You just need to be able to get them somehow.
You've just brought up a very important point. This conversation started with, what do you want your bottom line to be? And you're both absolutely right. There's also the need for having a decent bottom line for all those reasons. So it's both.
Dave, let me ask you this. If you're disappointed in your profit margin, and it sounds like there certainly have been times where you have been, what's your first thought? Can you cut to a better profit margin?
No, I'm living it right now. There's only a couple of numbers, 3 numbers that I have any control over. I have no control over the insurance much, the real estate taxes. It's like the first usual suspect is always, gee, I think we aren't charging enough. That's always the first one for me. And I've talked about that before. The second one now is, and I just figured this out yesterday, talking about business models, maybe I need to cut back on I don't spend a lot in advertising, but even the little I'm spending, I'm not so sure it's worth it, because the world has changed so dramatically. Like putting magazine ads in the upscale designer magazines costs a lot of money. And I'm just not so sure that pays for itself anymore, if it ever did. And then I've got something like, do I need a receptionist? Do I need, the phone calls are a fraction of what they used to be. People use their smartphones now. People email. I'm not taking in anywhere, but I still have a full-time receptionist sitting there, and I'm wondering whether I can't move that around somehow. So it's the first ones to look at for me are pricing and advertising, because those are the easiest to move. Cutting my way to it, not happening. I've got solid people that have been here for. No, I don't think. If I hired some consultant, they would come in here and say, you got to fire 5 people. And like, that ain't happening. They're doing something. They're all doing something.
You're talking about such an important idea, right? Which is, do you cut your way to success, or do you build something? And like what Paul's doing with going into the B2B space after having gone kind of direct to the buyer for a long time, like he's creating something new and he's investing in that. You just can't. It's just so rare you can kind of cut your way into winning.
It's a bad model. It's a model for a mature second or third generation business. But if you're trying to grow something, you start at 0. What do you cut? Right? There's nothing to cut.
There are a lot of businesses out there, I just deal with them, that have they've knee-jerked and they cut their service back so bad, like, I'm done. I call them, they don't call you back. There are companies, you can't even find a phone number on their website. They've decided they're going to save some money and not have anyone answering the phone. There are some companies making some really bad decisions now. They've gone past cutting fat. Now they're cutting into the bone. And one day, someone's going to find out they put themselves out of business. So they're not going to blame it on the service that they're giving or not giving. They're going to blame it on the economy. They're going to blame it on their bank. There are a lot of companies giving horrible service now that they rationalize it because, I can't find people, which, give me a break. I mean, and from my experience of being the customer, I would say 75% of my experiences now with dealing with anyone are disappointing, and it's going to catch up to them. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, well, sort of. I mean,
well, Jay, I'm staying the hell away from your lawn. I'll tell you that.
I mean, I think you're putting your finger on something that's been going on for a while now, which is market consolidation and monopolization. So it's like, have you ever tried to call Google to get something done? Like you're never going to get a hold of anybody there, but they don't care because they're the game. They're it. You don't have a choice.
This is not a consumer hotline. Let's move to another topic. This is another thing that Jay triggered in his conversations about his interest in looking at going in the direction of employee ownership and an ESOP. He mentioned that one of the triggers was looking at his 401k statements and realizing how little money his employees were putting aside. I'm curious, Paul, Shawn, have either of you looked at the 401k accounts that your employees have?
Boy, well, we have a simple plan, which is a little bit different. So I don't look at their accounts, but I see how much they're taking out of their paychecks. I mean, first of all, despite multiple offers, half of my employees just won't sign up for any retirement plan. And I haven't gotten around to making it mandatory, because the minute I do that, it'll cost me quite a bit of money.
I don't think you can make it mandatory. You can make it the default position, right?
No, he means he'll put some money in it. But what I'm curious, you just said that's not the kind of plan you have. Correct me if I'm wrong. You could get a report.
Well, I could answer the question to the penny if you give me a minute, but it's just a question of people don't save that much money. I don't actually understand what the long-term plan is for those people. And I don't understand how any of us are going to survive, honestly. Like the guys who sell their business for $20 million, got it. I can see a way forward on that. But I have a feeling that part of the answer is that, this is a stupid thing to say. I'm not going to say it. Okay, never mind.
Oh, come on. That's part of your magic, Paul. Give it to us.
All right. My feeling is we could all probably get by on a lot less than we think we can. And that when the moment comes and you've got X amount in your retirement account and you get real, you're just going to make it go.
Okay, I don't think that's stupid, but it's not. Here's the problem, because I'm a little older than you and I've been in business for longer. I'm not at all getting on a soapbox. Everybody should do what they want. If it doesn't bother someone that their employees are going to retire or be disabled, can't work, and they leave with not a penny, not their fault, not their problem. Okay, I'm not getting on a soapbox. It bothers me though, and I got lots of people that have been here for 20 years that I care deeply about that have helped me build a business. And it bothers me because I never looked at the 401k balances. And many of these people have $4,000 in it. And that is extremely troubling to me. Again, if it's not, my friend told me when I told him, probably goes, why is that your problem? Okay, it's not, he doesn't think it is my problem because I've made it my problem. So I don't think that it's a case of they'll make it work. No, I think they're going to be screwed.
But Jay, like, here's how I look at that. I control what happens in my building, and I control my relationships with my employees, and I pay them above market, and we give bonuses, and I do everything I can to make this a good place to work. And what happens when they leave? I can't control that. I've had a couple of employees where I really tried to sit down with them and say, I'm paying you a lot of money for a young single man. Why are you always broke and complaining about it? And I'd be happy to sit down with you and make a budget, blah, blah, blah. And just was told basically bug out. It's none of your business. So I'm like, okay.
Well, you're partially right. You say you can't control it, but you certainly, if you chose to, and I'm not telling you should, you could just say, all right, we're doing well now. Everybody's going to get $1,000 in their 401k plan at the end of the year. You could do that if you chose to and you wanted to. That would be a little bit of a control thing. At least they'd have 40 grand when they retire.
To sign up, and believe me, I've tried to get everybody to sign up, and some simply will not do it. They get that money in there. When we pay bonuses, yeah, some of it goes in there. I'm not sure that the actual issue of people not having resources when they retire is something that a business owner can control. What you can control is what you pay people and what kind of workplace it is. And how they go spend that money, save it, do this, do that, buy this car, buy that car. I'm not getting into that because it's a waste of time.
But you can't say you can't control it. You can help.
Okay. The decision to buy a $90,000 loaded pickup as opposed to a $17,000 used Prius amounts to way more than any $1,000 I'm going to put in somebody's 401k. And I got no control over that. And I have no desire to even get into that conversation. So, yeah, you can tinker with these mechanisms. You can do what you should do, which is, whatever the customary contribution from the company should be and having the program available. But I can't fix people's finances. I just can't because I don't control how they spend money or what they think about it.
Clearly, none of us can. I'm just suggesting, just from my personal thing, I would feel better if when they went to retire, they had 50 grand in the 401k. And I've done well enough that I really, literally 2 blocks from my factory, there's 10 or 20 tents underneath the bridge. I don't want to leave work one day and realize my employee can't work anymore. They're too old to work, whatever. And they're living in a tent under the bridge. Now, I certainly can't make them all, lovely retirements in Florida, but at least if they had 40 grand, 30 grand, 20 something, and that's totally my choice. I can't fix their retirement. I'm not telling anyone else to do it.
40 grand is peanuts too.
You know what it is though? It's 40 grand better than nothing. That's what it is.
Okay. But again, the real answer is a holistic approach to somebody's finances over their whole life.
For sure.
And when I give people a good job and pay them well, I've done my part. The rest of it is up to them.
Shawn, how are your employees doing, and what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I always try to remember that I'm in a different position than business owners that, have roles in their business that pay, I don't know, $40,000, $50,000 a year. We're just in a different market space. I mean, the cost to employ the type of folks who work in our business is just much, much higher. So as a consequence, they have, you just have a different cohort. But, something I think that does bridge the gap between this conversation is I've been just thinking a lot about financial education and, where do we learn how to think about money? And most of us don't get that training. I grew up in a household that the lessons I took were terrible if I had just followed those lessons, my whole life, living off of credit, living beyond our means. I don't blame my family for it, but it's just, we just don't do financial education in this country at all. And so some of us get lucky and along the way we meet the right people or we self-educate or we're motivated. Some of us are just blessed to have good fortune from the beginning and then we fritter it away like some wealthy people do. But I think there's an opportunity for business owners to help not only on a financial front, which I really admire how Jay thinks about this, but I think also on a education perspective, of helping people understand the value of an emergency account, helping people understand the value of compounding interest, and I'm trying to work on that in our company because even though I have, like I said, highly educated, very smart people who make good money, it's all over the map. Some of them are contributing to their 401k and some are not. And they totally should be and could, but they aren't. And so I think about that a lot.
Do you talk to them about it?
We do. Yeah. I mean, constantly. But I also think there's something to be said for outside expertise and, not their boss. I think like a financial coach to help folks, that's a goal of mine in the company is to create resources for that, so folks can do some lightweight financial planning, thinking about kids and do I contribute to a college fund? The problem is that the industry is very predatory, so there's a lot of folks out there who are trying to sell financial products and they're incentivized by the commission they make on those products. And so to help an employee to have access to an RIA, registered investment advisor, that's a fiduciary, meaning that they're required by law to put your interests ahead of theirs. I think a business providing that to its employees would be tremendously valuable and not very expensive. So that's something I'm thinking about.
I want to be very clear. I'm suggesting if one owns a business and they either say, I have no control over what they do with their money or it's not my problem, I'm not arguing with that. In my situation, I've done well enough that just like people get joy out of buying a boat or they get joy out of buying a condo somewhere, I will get joy out of knowing when my people retire, there's something there. There's something there. I certainly don't think that I can fund their retirement properly, but I'm trying to figure out what I can because I'm going to think about it. Hopefully I'm around for 30 years. Every year for the next 20 years, I'm going to have 1 to 2 people retiring or disabled and can't work. I don't want to keep going to their going away parties thinking, my God, are you screwed? Like I said, even if it's only 40 grand, better than zero. That's all. And I'm not preaching it to anybody else. That's just my personal feeling and it's worth it to me. And that makes me feel good. That's all.
We're almost out of time. Last topic. There's, a lot of talk about possible recession, a lot of headlines about layoffs. Are you having any trouble getting, or more trouble than usual, getting paid for what you do, especially maybe from larger companies that you might deal with? Has that started to be a problem for any of you?
Not me.
That was not you, Paul.
No.
No, Lauren, you do owe me $30 though from a couple of years ago when you said you were going to pay me back from that lunch thing. Other than that, everyone else has paid me.
I'm working on it, Jay.
We got paid early by a very large corporation who just wanted to get rid of the cash before the end of last year. So I don't know what to make of that. I was happy about it.
Shawn, how about you? Are you getting paid?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked really hard to make the issue of payment not an issue.
What do you mean? Have you done that?
Well, I think getting friction out of how you collect money is a massive competitive advantage. So to the conversation earlier, how do you generate better profits, right? I've always believed that the mechanism of collecting money is low value, high, moderate cost. And so I get paid before we do the work. So it's not like, we do a bunch of work and then we go asking for the money. We get paid before we do the work. Most of our clients are now on ACH. So it just comes straight out of the account. So I just learned some really good lessons in the recession around collecting money and to not count on accounts receivable. And so how do you get rid of the accounts receivable number or make it really, really low, or days sales outstanding number, make that very, very low? So that's not my issue. What I see in the market isn't that people aren't paying us or so forth. It's more the kind of uncertainty that gets created by the nonstop conversation about recessions, that it makes it difficult for me to get new customers. So that's been my biggest challenge.
I can see that the whole inflation thing, it's like that's all they can talk about.
Yep. Yeah.
Was it hard for you to make the shift to getting paid up front?
It took time, and it's weird. You have to kind of go get new customers in order to pull something like that off, because existing customers are used to paying you in a certain way and they don't want to change. But when you get new customers, you just set the expectation in the beginning. And so that hasn't been, I would say it's actually not been that hard. It's part of a larger philosophy of trying to get to, it's a blue ocean strategy of getting to buyers that are not typical buyers. Because if you're competing in a known market with customers that have an expectation of how things work, then they're going to have also an expectation of how things work from a payment perspective. So, I know many businesses that are in industry where it's like it's net 30 or it's net 60, and that's just the expectation in the industry. Really hard to break that. But if you use a blue ocean strategy of creating new customers, then you have an opportunity to set the terms of how you get paid. You know what?
If I hired you and you told me I need a fifth, I wouldn't think anything of it. Fair enough. I mean, why should you take all the risk? I would have a problem if you said pay it all up front, but I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation.
Well, and you back it up with a warranty. So that's the trick. And I think I was talking to somebody about this recently, of how you basically say, look, if you're not happy, I'll refund your money. And then you do this every month. So it's not like I'm asking for 6 months worth of work or a year commitment. You're doing it month to month. So you're reducing the risk, but at the same time, you're not spending energy trying to collect money, which is huge.
How many times have you refunded the money? Tell us.
0.
Okay. Little hesitation there, but okay.
I've had relationships go south, and I've made the offer. Like I've said, hey, look, if you're not happy, look, we're happy to refund what we've done. And then that's when people are like, no, actually, what you've done is valuable. It's just, we don't want to keep going in this direction. That's okay. But yeah, 0.
All right. My thanks to Shawn Busse, Paul Downs, and Jay Goltz, and of course to our sponsor, The Great Game of Business, which helps businesses implement open book management and employee ownership. You can learn more at greatgame.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. Wait, don't leave yet. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like the 21 Hats owners to address, send it to me by replying to your morning report or by email at lauren@21hats.com. That's LOREN @21hats.com. Do it now before you forget. And don't be afraid to tell Jay what you really think. He can take it. And if you got something out of this conversation, help us reach more business owners. Tell a friend. Subscribe and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. Subscribe to the Morning Report at 21hats.com. This episode was produced by Jess Thuberon, founder of Blank Word Productions. Okay, now you can leave. Thanks for listening, everyone.